Welcome to BAM It with John, Michael, and Mari, covering all things business, accounting, marketing, management, and IT. The place where businesses and entrepreneurs find the forest through the trees.
Hello and welcome to BAM It. And today, of course, I'm always here with John Michael Cletus of Peridot Consulting, and I'm Mari Peterson with Marketing Outpost. Say hello.
Hello.
I feel like I'm talking to my 12-year-old or something.
Well,
Say hello to the people.
I appreciate that, Mari. Thank you.
Well, in today's episode, we're going to talk about something very popular, actually, across the country and everywhere else, but also very much so in Asheville and the surrounding area, and that is beer. And today we have with us the owner of Home Place Beer Company out of Burnsville, North Carolina, John Silver. But before we begin that, we always start off with a few interesting tidbits. What do you have, John Michael?
Interesting facts. So let's just talk about, first of all, just Asheville specifically, where we're at. And I think right now, and this changes, I think this number came from February, and there's probably 10 more breweries since then. But Asheville has 33 breweries, and the greater Asheville area, which I don't even know if that includes out to Burnsville, frankly, is about 48. And I want to say there's a lot more than that. And like if you include more surrounding counties, there's over 100 in Western North Carolina. Do you have any numbers on that, John?
That's the last I heard was over 100 for greater WNC.
Yeah, and if you look at per capita breweries, we're the highest in the nation because we're such a small area population-wise, and a ton of breweries. Yeah. So we are a big community. We support local, and basically the breweries are the old traditional German breweries where the local watering hubs now. It's kind of how it is around here. And Asheville, we're known as Beer City, USA. And do you want to know the inside story of how that happened? I kind of know the inside story.
You know the secret.
Well, there is this poll. I forget the name of the poll. Some famous beer writer a few years ago had a poll that was just, log in and sign what's your favorite beer city. And Asheville voted on that and won, Beer City. And then they got a hold of it. And before you know it, everybody was loving it and did the poll like 3 years in a row. And we run Beer City for like 3 years in a row. And we started owning it and calling ourselves Beer City USA. But the inside story is that was just a small poll that nobody was really paying attention to. It's one of those stupid things that are at the bottom of like your CNN article. You don't even look at it. But Julia Talla with Brews and Ales, back in the time when this poll became popular, had a kind of a popular blog presence, and she was really involved in the beer scene of Asheville at the time. There's maybe 5 breweries in Asheville, moving up to maybe 10. And she got a hold of this poll and did a big social network push on, hey, everybody, vote for this, get this out. Asheville needs to get on the map, because at the time it was cities like obviously Portland, Oregon, and Denver, Colorado, and Asheville wasn't even a thought at the time. So she was like, Asheville needs to get on the map. We got a big thing going on. We need to let people know about that. So she did this big social media push and got actually enough people to vote to where we won the poll. And it was an anomaly. Oh my God, look, this little town in North Carolina won this poll. And it became such a thing that now Asheville owns it. And now we call ourselves Beer City USA. And it had such small, humble beginnings. And I always see Julia Talla and Brews and Ales, and I say, you guys are uncredited for the founders of Beer City USA. So I just want to say that.
Yeah, I was in Portland once when my wife and I were visiting the Pacific Northwest, and it was during that period when that was first becoming a thing for Asheville, and they were aware of it up there. And they kind of made fun of me because Portland was a much more advanced, progressive brewing town at the time, and Asheville was still, making pale ales and porters and IPAs. And I remember going into Cascade Barrel House, which is a nationally known sour brewery that makes awesome stuff. And I was talking to one of the brewers, and they're like, "Oh, where are you from?" And I was like, "Well, I'm from Asheville." He's like, "Oh, Beer City, USA, right?" And he was just kind of giving me a hard time about it, but it was a big deal at the time, and I think the town did get a lot of traction and a lot of play off of that. And I don't know if it really influenced the like the broader picture and the sort of the recruitment of even more breweries, but it definitely didn't hurt, and it created a lot of good PR and buzz for the town. I remember.
Yeah, and the town itself got way behind it and started building it, started using it in their marketing campaigns. And I agree with you. I don't think it necessarily had much effect on the trend line of where the breweries were going and where Asheville was just growing itself organically. But from a marketing perspective, it, exponentially, I think.
Yeah, and they made the font, and the postcards, and it was a stamp. It was like on every advertising thing Asheville had for a while. It was just this patented Beer City font you saw and everything.
Exactly. Now it's a thing. Now we're just like, oh yeah, we're Beer City. And I think to your point, compared to Portland at the time, when we were first crowned Beer City, we were just an infant compared to Portland.
Sure.
But now I think we more and more.
There's a lot of enthusiasm though.
There's a lot of enthusiasm. I think now more and more are more holding our own when it comes to that, especially now that we've got New Belgium here now, Sierra Nevada, Oscar Blues, some of these bigger players. We've got White Labs here now giving us credence. White Labs is a yeast.
I know what they are.
So
John Michael's giving me that look. I'm not a beer connoisseur, but I do know what White Labs is.
Okay. Well, that's pretty cool that we got a White Labs.
Yeah,
right?
That was huge. Yeah.
I mean, that's
one of two in the country.
Exactly. That's huge. So do you know what Sinosilicophobia is? Sinosilicophobia.
Can you spell that fast 5 times?
Sinosilicophobia.
No clue.
That is fear. You probably have this a lot and you don't realize it. It is fear of an empty beer glass.
Yes. Yes, if my servers have that happening, I'm very much fearful of that.
Yes, you might want
I dare you to throw that at him.
You should call a beer that. The Sinosilicophobia beer.
Somehow that's, if you say it really fast, say it really fast.
I don't know. Sinosilicophobia. Sinosilicophobia.
It just sounds worse every time you say it.
No.
I don't think you should call any beer that.
All right.
Anyway, so I want to get back to some basic questions. We have danced all around John here. We've talked about Asheville and all these other breweries. I want to know about you. Where'd you come from? Your background. How did you get into beer? How did you choose Burnsville?
Sure. Well, I've been professionally brewing for almost 15 years now, which seems kind of crazy, I guess. But
you were doing it before anybody thought about being cool and doing it?
I guess. My friend Chad, who does all our graphic art design, which is kind of a cool full circle story. The guy who I first started homebrewing with when we were like 20, 21 years old, at his parents' house in tiny little Double Island in Yancey County. We rented we bought our first homebrew set up from the place just up the street from you guys here, the Asheville Brewer Supply. And just kind of, I was fresh out of college. I'd majored in journalism, and I thought I was going to be a newspaper writer or some sort of feature writer for magazines. That was sort of the trajectory I'd made for myself, at least in my mind. And then ended up going on this big hike. I did a through hike of the Appalachian Trail in 2005.
You hiked the whole trail?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's huge.
So 25, I just set off to do that. And I was just kind of at this crossroads, I guess, sort of the typical passe thing. But it really was kind of just one of those moments where it was this industry I've chosen and I've gone to school for is not quite working out the way I like. So I'm just going to go. I've saved money. I'm going to go do this trip. So during that hike, I really just thought a lot about what I wanted to do when I got back. And that was, and this was 05, 06. So Asheville was just, I think Pisgah had just opened. So when I got back from the hike, Pisgah had been open for a few months. And I remember going to Barley's and trying a few of their beers and just kind of being really excited about what they were doing and thinking like, gosh, how can I get into this company or any company? So I started making calls and showing up and begging for work. And the guys at Pisgah gave me a job washing kegs for growlers. That was all they could do at the time. I was just volunteering, basically.
What's a growler?
Growlers are kind of old now, but we still use them. It's just a glass jug you fill beer from a tap into.
Like a glass milk jug.
Okay.
or a different shape.
And it's a to-go package, so it's like
okay.
if you're at a bar or a brewery and you find a beer you like, you can get a glass growler to go of that beer, because
Like a
that
jug
place
of it.
may not have cans or bottles. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I started with Pisgah, just kind of sweeping the floors and washing kegs there. I learned a lot from those guys. And looking back now with where I'm at with our company, I feel like there was a lot of things I learned that I didn't realize I was learning at the time, business related, and how those guys I thought were pretty savvy business people at the time, and how they were able to catapult their brewery into this niche just for this specific area. Of course, they were kind of a wholesale powerhouse in Asheville, along with Highland and Green Man and some of the others, in the sense that they sold a lot of beer to accounts, but they created this atmosphere and a destination spot that just made people want to be there. And so that's how they kind of seemed to center their business model around. And so after Pisgah, I didn't brew there initially. I was friends with Catawba Brewing owner Scott Pyatt, and he was still just a very small brewery at the time down in tiny Glen Alpine, which is in between Marion and Morganton, and have since they've gone on to be this giant regional brewery now. But that was my first brewing job, was with Catawba, and that was in 2006, and I was with him for about 2.5, 3 years. And then I was living in Asheville at the time, so it was a lot of back and forth, going all the way down there, and a lot of commuting. So eventually, I talked the Pisgah guys into rehiring me as a brewer, and so I was there for about 3 years. And then Pisgah was going through a lot of sort of tumultuous growth and a lot of personality issues, and myself included. I'm sure I was just a young, like, sort of brash 27-year-old kid who probably thought he knew more than he did. And eventually I left there and went to French Broad, which was French Broad's one of the older breweries, and they have this really great European style of doing beer. And I learned a lot about process there that I'd never learned anywhere else.
They were one of the first breweries in town to do a lager.
Yep.
Which for a microbrewery is kind of a big deal, because it, maybe let you expand upon it, but the way it takes up tank space.
French Broad did Goldenrod Pilsner. I think it might have been the first lager beer. Pilsner's under the lager family in Asheville. I think it was the first lager that was Asheville made. And it does take, it's just time consuming. It takes eight weeks roughly to do a good lager, as opposed to 2 weeks to do an IPA or something like that.
Yeah. So from a business perspective, that tank,
it's tied up.
You're doing one batch of beer that takes 8 weeks to produce, whereas you could do a IPA and do 4 batches in the same amount of time.
Yeah, so it was a commitment, and they had a kind of a philosophy of brewing, and they stuck to it, which I thought was really cool. So I was at French Broad as sort of a shift brewer / assistant brewer for a number of years, through, I think it was 2009 through 2012. And then Oscar Blues was the first large brewery. I remember hearing like the rumors of them coming, and at the time I was in my 4th brewery. I'd had good experiences at each one, and I think I'd sort of left each succeeding place for a better opportunity. And so when Oscar Blues came along and they started hiring, I really thought that that was going to be my career, and I applied there, and I was one of the first brewers hired. So I was the lead production brewer at Oscar Blues Brevard for it seems like every brewery I worked at was about 3 years. And I tell people, like, looking back on it now, if I had not had the Oscar Blues experience, the good and the bad that came with working for that company, and the good was, I think the bad, there wasn't really bad things about that particular job. It was more so like they were just growing so fast, and there was not a really strong structured culture there. So it was just a lot of seat of your pants type stuff all the time. And I was looking for more stability at the time. I just got married, and it was it was a chaotic place to be at the time. I think there's great people there, and I love the friends I've made there. But I look back at my time at Oscar Blues and think, wow, that was a formative experience for me to be able to do what I do now, which is run obviously a much smaller business, but I never thought about jumping into being a business owner and dealing with that kind of stress and responsibility before I was at Oscar Blues, because Oscar Blues was just a totally different sink or swim type of situation. Like there was so much pressure on all of us to perform every day. And, there was millions of dollars on the line, and they were trying to make this big expansion, of course, into the East. And they did all that. And I'm really lucky to have been there for that formative experience. But at some point, I was living in Asheville then. My wife and I had bought a house, and we're living in Oakley. And I was, commuting every day. So that was taxing. So eventually Highwire expanded, and they opened up a new production facility just like a mile from where we lived at the time. And it was an easy decision to get on board with those guys. And that was my last production brewing job before leaving to form Home Place. And Highwire was awesome, just absolutely an awesome experience with all those guys. I feel like the guys that run Highwire also helped me have the take on a lot of, I guess, just kind of have the confidence to jump into something, because they looked at things in a particular way, and everywhere you go, and this doesn't necessarily just mean for the beer industry, but if you're in a lot of different positions in your given field, it's nice to learn and absorb from so many different people and perspectives that are doing things that you may eventually be doing. And Highwire was, I think, the guys that started it were pharmacists before, and so they weren't in the beer world at all, but they had this great business plan and just executed it very well, and they're killing it. And it was just a very inspiring kind of experience.
I wonder what they add to their little mix, having been chemists.
Right.
So
right.
I'm learning a lot here, because you guys are, of course, you're extremely experienced. John Michael, I know you drink a lot of beer. You also were a brewer, home craft.
Yeah, and I've been helping professionally. I've been professionally part of the brewing industry since, 06.
So I'm considered a complete
seen
novice. What I've heard here is that, because you were kind of rating the beer scene based on, is it complexity or process or both? Sounds like you were saying the IPA is like pretty simple, and then you were saying you're like, woo, somebody did a lager, and I was like, what the heck does that mean?
Yeah, so I mean, just the very basic explanation is there's ales and there's lagers, and there's certainly those are trees, just like a family tree. There's tons of subcategories within those headings, but lagers are more traditional German cold fermented, cold aged beers. That the type of yeast that's used for those beers requires a lot of maturing process for it to really start to sing once it's finished. Now, ales are more just kind of fruity, and just have the yeasts are way more quick to make the beer what you want it to be.
Where do all these multiple flavors come in?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of fruit in beer now. There's a lot of mixed cultures. Mixed cultures are bacteria and different wild yeasts, and so there's all these different types of barrel aged beers too. We typically just our audience enjoys light lagers and IPAs. That's the main thing and that's kind of what I like.
I need to get some of that.
I like that's mostly what I like to drink too. And we have 16 beers on tap right now, so it's a lot to keep up with. We try to do a lot of different styles. We're not trying to be, Home Place is not trying to be, like a really crazy wicked weed type barrel aged, tons of mixed culture, funky, weird beers. I mean, I love all that stuff, but it's just not where our demographic and our particular audience is, where we are. And since roughly 80% of our business is retail driven, we have to sort of play it down the middle. And I always like to think we do approachable beers with a sense of place. We try to use a lot of our local farmers and different ingredients from our local sources, but we make beers that are kind of what you might say traditional, or just sort of down the middle of the road sort of type beers, but they they're all really approachable, and they're mostly low ABV.
Well, that's one thing I love about your brewery is you'll go into some breweries and there'll be like 8%, 9%, 7.7, 6. And if, you want to have two 9% beers are just a lot, and sometimes they're heavier.
And John Michael can't handle it from what I understand.
I can't handle it.
I've never seen you. I don't know if I've hung out with you too much drinking big beers.
I always try to, if I'm driving, no matter what, I never have more than 2 beers. But one of the things I do now is I just find myself not reading what it is, but looking at the ABV. But I don't want to digress on that. And it is ironic talking about lagers and ales that the lager, from a microbrewery standpoint, takes up more tank space. It is more money. But from a consumer standpoint, you think, oh, Budweiser is a lager. It's just a light, nothing beer. I'm going for this IPA because it's a microbrew with a bunch of hops. Yeah. But in reality, that IPA was much easier to brew and much cheaper to brew than that Pilsner. To an extent.
There's like a spreadsheet for that somewhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like it's time kept in the tank versus ingredients. I remember at Highwire, we used to, our head brewer Luke would he would fight to keep the lagers at 8 weeks in the tank, and I can see it now from the owner's perspective. They're like, let's how about 7 weeks? How about 6 weeks? Like let's flip that tank and make some more beer, and have that be something we turn through quicker. And it's always kind of a battle, a good one. But to their mind, the lager was the most expensive beer, even though it didn't have the most expensive cost of goods in it, because it was just sitting there taking up all that time in that tank.
There's babysitting the thing.
Yeah.
So I'm going to skip to a question because it's related to this. How does technology factor into the beer industry and in your brewery?
So that's a good question. When we first started, it was just me and a couple of servers, some bar staff. So I was kind of running everything. We were very, very scrappy bunch there in the beginning, and we still are. But a lot of what we're doing that's helped, I think, is we're taking on these new communication platforms. Like you guys may have heard of Slack. We started using that at Highwire, and when they introduced it and they like required everyone to get on it, I just kind of thought it was redundant because it seemed like just a bunch of text messaging that you could just do a text messaging. But once I got into it, I realized like, wow, this is, you have it's just totally separate thing that's only work related, and you can communicate a lot more efficiently and with teams and different departments. So we use Slack a lot. And then we also just started using this new thing called monday.com. Yeah. And it's a task oriented system that helps me. And now that we've brought on more staff and everybody has like designated tasks and things they're working on, it's just streamlined our whole process as far as doing things like planning events to what are we brewing this week, what's the tap room event for this week, here's our sales for this week, and it's all just in one easy format.
Well, Slack just went public too.
Yeah, I heard about that.
And talking about technology, just to dumb it down from my home brewer perspective, to make beer, basically you just boil grains, take that hot water, ferment it with yeast, give it a couple weeks, and boom, you got beer. That's the extreme dumbed down version. But technology, and I'll let you interject here, but technology introduces not only quality control of that, and I guess what's the term I'm looking for? Replicatability.
Mm-hmm.
What's that word?
I just enjoy watching you.
Repeatable.
With these words.
I know, I'm terrible. If you're an average podcast listener, I have terrible vocabulary. But, you can replicate the process better.
So like with technology and beer, specifically with beer, there's a lot of people use what's called Beersmith, I believe, and Brewer's Friend, and some of these other digital recipe formulation things, and we use those a little bit. But really, if you're in the business or if you're a brewer long enough professionally, you kind of can start to just bypass that stuff a little bit. And just kind of know what to expect out of certain percentages. I mean, you can nerd out on it. You can they have apps that you can program in a certain water profile that you're going to like treat your water with to replicate a certain water profile from a particular part of the world. I know Tim at Twin Leaf does a lot of that, and I mean, it's really just what you want to do. It's really We're really, I guess, for our purposes, brewing and technology, just the actual brewing part, we're pretty bare bones. We don't really get into that as much as others probably.
Is there like a fast yeast, fast aging process?
It's funny.
Really
there is a new
consistent?
yeast that's very popular now that people are making like beers in a week from grain to glass. It's this Norwegian yeast that's changing the industry. It's
and it comes
crazy.
down to space and time is money,
Yeah. So like if you want, I mean, they're saying the flavor profile that this yeast produces is similar to what, is a typical house ale yeast. So
I'm seeing that process with some whiskeys and new things like that are coming out where they're able to call it aged, but it really didn't technically age.
I've heard of that. And that's going to be obviously a huge debate and a lot of infighting over what's better going forward.
Yeah, the naturalists versus the innovators, I guess.
Yeah, like 35 millimeter versus DSLR, whatever it may be. Like there's always going to be the purists.
Yeah. I've always said whenever I meet brewers, I put them in two categories. There's what I call the scientist brewer and the artist brewer. And I don't want to name names, but some they're just like, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
And then there's a scientist brewer. You talk to them, they're like, well, I got to get the pH level to 78, and I got to put exactly 3 grams of these hops in.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So it's kind of a little bit of that. I think you're kind of down the line a little bit. You've got to be a scientist to an extent when you have to replicate the process. But.
Yeah, I mean, we're mostly concerned with the yeast health ongoing and the cellar side of things. The brew day is I mean, I've always just kind of thought, it's easy to make to some degree it's easy to make a batch of wort, which is unfermented beer. It's the challenge and the skill, I think, is mostly in the fermentation and the yeast health and the how you pitch, like what cells you pitch, what number. There's this whole science between like how much cells you pitch to achieve a certain fermentation, attenuation, and how healthy your yeast is and how many generations you use yeast. So most of us use our yeast like 10 or 12 times. We've gone up to like 30 or 40 different generations and had great results. So we're mostly like sensory oriented in the sense of like, a lot of people with that 12th generation of yeast will just say, oh, we've reached that. We're dumping that yeast. We're ordering a whole new pitch and spending that money.
Like no matter what.
Yeah. And I've just always been like, if it tastes good and it's producing great beer, why would you do that? But everybody's different.
I put beers into 2 categories. I like it. I don't like it.
I like that. That's funny. That's funny you say that because I used to say a similar thing all the time is that I think when I was in the industry as a production brewer, a lot of times people we'd get into these tastings and it's kind of becomes like a wine tasting to some degree for some people. And I totally respect that. And there's obviously a lot of knowledge and ingenuity with learning how to recognize different flavor profiles and on your palate and all this stuff. But yeah, at the end of the day, I was like, you either like it or you don't.
Exactly. I mean, for somebody who's a novice, I'll try different things and then I think, yes or no. Mm-hmm. So we're going to take a brief break, but then after the break, I do want to ask you about Burnsville and what makes Asheville special that has, I guess, been like a magnet for all these breweries. Is it the water? Is it the air? I know that water is a big deal. Isn't that, how much percentage of that of your product?
90%.
Exactly.
Yeah, at least, yeah.
So think about that and we'll answer that when we come back.
This podcast is brought to you by Peridot Consulting and Marketing Outpost. Peridot Consulting offers a new paradigm in accounting services. We work with individuals and businesses toward prosperity and financial happiness. Please visit www.peridotconsultinginc.com for more information. Marketing Outpost provides strategies to solve problems and strategies to grow your business. Please visit www.marketingoutpost.com for more information.
All right, we're back from the break, and we wanted to get into, other than Asheville and the Asheville area being cool, why is it good for breweries? Why do they? And why
did you select Burnsville, which is not that far from Asheville, but was there a particular reason?
So I guess the first, Asheville, and I think the water profile in Asheville is considered by most people, most brewers, to be exceptional. I'm not sure why that is. I do know that Asheville water is very soft in the sense it has very little mineral content. So it creates a nice, I guess you'd say like a nice canvas to build a beer onto. And you can treat the water with different minerals. So you're just going in with a blank slate, whereas a lot of other, and certainly once you get closer to the coast, you have a lot more minerality in your water and different compounds that may not be particularly conducive to making great beer. I don't know this. It always seemed like Asheville water's like chlorine levels were lower than some of the other cities I've lived in. So of course all that gets filtered out, but mostly I think it's just it's the water. Asheville became a weird, fun place for people to visit, like in the mid-aughts, like the 2000 era.
Yeah,
And
it's the boho culture.
yeah, so it was like it's not really close to anything else that's got a similar vibe. So it just attracted a particular demographic of people, and it's changed so much, obviously, since all this started with the brewing craze. But I think it was a combination of things like craft culture. We had a lot of artists. We had a lot of culinary people doing great things. So you kind of factor in all these things, and it was just a really ripe for a beer culture to spring up organically, seemed like. And as far as Burnsville, Burnsville's where I grew up. So I'm from there. I lived there from the time I was born until I left for college. So it's always been a fun place to go back and visit. My family still lives near there, and an opportunity came along to do this brewing venture. I'd looked at a place in Asheville that fell through, and I'm glad it did, because you're talking about earlier, I think, with sort of the old European model, the brewing industry is becoming so saturated on the wholesale level, and people fighting for shelf space and tap space, and it's become, the model is where people are doing well, seems like, or in these businesses that are already hyper established, like Highland or even bigger. And then you have sort of this middle ground of breweries where I would say like anything from 3,000 barrels a year to 10,000 barrels a year. That's a pretty good range, and that's a huge portion of the brewing industry right now. Those guys are struggling more than most, I think.
And how much is in a barrel?
31 gallons.
31 gallons per barrel.
Yeah.
And wasn't there a recent legal change that wasn't that good for small breweries? You can do more or something?
Yeah, the North Carolina law changed. They popped the self-distribution cap, which was, I think, 50,000 barrels a year. Maybe it was 25. I can't be sure. I'll have to look. But there was one brewery who was still, most breweries, once they get 5,000 plus barrels, or sometimes even much less, sign with distributors. And so they start that 3-tier thing where they, have a distributor come and pick up their product, and that distributor delivers it to wholesale accounts. What happened is that there was a few breweries that lobbied aggressively to the state house, I guess, and they allowed that amount of barrelage you could produce to still be self-distributed. If like as of last year, if you were, I can't remember if it was 25 or 50,000 barrels, but if you were over that, you had to sign with a distributor. There was one brewery in Burlington near Greensboro called Red Oak, and they had this massive fleet of delivery trucks, and they handle all their in-house distribution. It's crazy that they do it, and they do it well. So they were the main one. They had just reached a cap. They couldn't grow anymore because they couldn't continue to self-distribute with the law as it was. So they changed that. So now if you're, you can self-distribute up to, I think, 100,000 barrels or something like that.
Yeah.
These facts might have to be checked, but the point is like they allowed breweries to become bigger and keep their operations in-house on their sales side and not have to go with a distributor if they didn't want to.
And every state can be different. That's a North Carolina thing. South Carolina or other states, I don't know the rules, but they might require from day one you have a distributor. And other states might say there's no cap on this, so every state has their own. Yeah. It's weird how alcohol and these, they just get different rules everywhere. So if you're looking to go into another state.
Yeah, I mean, North Carolina, we're lucky that we can self-distribute. In Tennessee and South Carolina, I don't believe you can. So you have to go with a distributor if you're going to be a wholesaler. And so instantly, North Carolina has an advantage in that way. But We also have
then that attracts more.
It does, but we also have like some of the higher state excise taxes per gallon of any state in the country. And thankfully, the federal rate was cut in half in 2017, I believe, when that tax bill passed. And we're hoping that doesn't reset in January or February or whenever that's supposed to expire. So it could be that we start paying double our federal excise where it was before, which is $7 a barrel instead of $3.50, unless they make that permanent. So that's going to be interesting to see just from a tax perspective.
So other than the tax and legislative stuff, what would you say are your biggest challenges? And then I would say biggest opportunities, because before we started, you were talking about an expansion. Mm-hmm. So you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So as I said, we opened as a kind of an incubator space. It's tiny. It's about 1,900 square feet, which includes our brewery and our tap room. And we have about 600 barrels of capacity where we are right now as far as our fermentation space. So our tap room holds like 45 people at the most. And we've just pushed that over the 2.5 years we've been open. And we're in a town building, so, and where we're at is politically, alcohol is still a little touchy because we've only been a wet town. We're not even we're still in a dry county, Yancey County, which is 40 minutes north of Asheville here. The county's still dry, but they passed a referendum to legalize alcohol in the town limits of Burnsville in 2010. So it's still politically kind of it's a little raw for some people still. And the fact that we're in a town-owned building that's paid for by taxpayers and whatnot, that kind of ruffled some feathers. So we had to kind of instantly prove that we are a good community citizen with our business. We had just a lot of things to prove to the town, I feel like, when we opened. And as our business grew and as we started getting more accounts in Asheville and more traffic coming through our tap room, I was hoping we would be able to either add a kitchen or build an outdoor area, and we weren't able to do both based on the town just saying that you can't do these things. We're keeping the building as it is. This is what you're doing. If you want to do this, you have to go somewhere else. So we just reached a point where we thought, well, if this is going to continue to grow, we need or do anything other than just sort of stagnate and just be what it was. We had to look elsewhere, and it took us about a year, but we found the right opportunity with a new partner to build out this old 3-story, like 7,500 square foot old warehouse on the west side of town with this cool, huge outdoor area.
And it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, I think so. It's going to be unlike anything in 3 or 4 counties. It's and we're going to have a kitchen. We're partnering with. We've always had food trucks in our parking lot, which has been a good, sort of solution for us food wise. But the food truck model doesn't really translate to our folks in our town it does to some people, but a lot of people are still just have that sort of traditional restaurant experience. So I'm really excited that we're going to have that for them at our new place. We've partnered with one of the food trucks we've worked with from the beginning, and her name's Christine English, and she's the proprietor of Hog Hollow Wood Fired Pizza, and she's going to sublease out the kitchen space at our new spot and do all the food, kind of like the way Hillman does here. They have Rise Above Deli. It's a totally separate entity. Seems to work really well.
You don't want to get into the restaurant business.
Right. Yeah, we just want to focus on beer. We want to grow our wholesale footprint a little bit. I don't want to ever fight for shelf space with Sierra Nevada. That's just silly at this point. We need to find our niche within the means that we can on the wholesale level, but mostly just have this beacon of a place to recruit people to come through Burnsville, see Mount Mitchell, see, beautiful Yancey County, come to our spot, which is going to be really a unique spot for Burnsville, I think. And just that whole area, it's going to be kind of different. It really is like a small version of what, like if it just architecturally is people, they'll come through and see. It's just, it's pretty progressive, I think, for a little town. We kind of went for it, so to speak.
You can grow into it.
Yeah. The demand, I think
you don't
the demand
want to get into something that you outgrow really quickly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like when we first started at our little spot where we're at now, we opened in June of 2017. We had a 3-year lease, which ends next month. I really thought we would just exercise the right to renew that lease and just continue there for a period of time, because I just didn't I thought our growth or our sales weren't going to be where we needed them to be to grow out of that spot for a while. But Burnsville was just really ready for us for somebody to open something. And we try to build it as a community event space also. We do a lot of community events. We do a lot of nonprofit nights. We do things with all sorts of different groups where we just kind of give our space over to let people organize and host different things. And we do trivia nights, and it's just a good vibe, I think, and people have responded pretty well to it in our community.
Maybe you can do a beer pong podcast night. Michael, what do you think about that?
A beer pong podcast night?
Yeah.
It'd probably be very annoying listening to the beer pongs.
Well,
you'd have to narrate
them at the same time.
If you narrate it in the
beer
back.
pong.
Now, John Michael threw and totally whiffed and airballed the table completely.
Yeah. The challenging part about all this that we're getting into is, for me anyway, is like as someone who's very, very tight with money and just tried to save every nickel we've made. Now we're into this growth phase where we're starting to just get into the red a bit, and that's the most nerve-wracking part of it for me. And so I've talked to John Michael about this, and I think we're in a good position to do this a little bit of growth, but it is taking out lines of credit and just trying to leverage what we can as smartly as we can is very difficult. And then while also managing a team and
at least you're aware of that. There are some people that just throw the money all at it and don't they worry about the payback later.
you jump and the net will appear.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. When we opened, we were almost broke when we first opened back in 2017. And I remember there were times in the first 6 months where I just didn't know if it was going to work because we weren't fully we weren't reaching the people we needed to, or we were, it took us a while to sort of fine tune and educate our local base with what we were doing. Like a lot of people just thought, oh, this is supposed to be a brew pub. Where's your food menu? And, we had to sort of get people in the mindset that this is not your average place that's going to be in Burnsville. It's a tap room, community event center. And they eventually got it. And we built a big customer base off of that, and we have super loyal customers and awesome people that are pulling for us to do well. So I think we've built a lot of goodwill, hopefully, to carry us into this next phase.
Well, back to brewing, or just brewery industry as a whole, what's the best thing about what you do?
The best thing, well, I don't really brew anymore. I used to really like to brew, but I've sort of worked myself out of that job. So I think now it's the best thing is just working with great people. We've been very fortunate to have a great staff. We've not had, it's just been very smooth to that degree. And we have smart people working for us, people that have ideas that are better than mine, and people that I like to delegate that to. And that's fun. I like empowering other people to make their own decisions for the company and sort of own their position is that's the most fun part for me.
And you're leading the growth. You're watching your baby graduate.
Right. Yeah, that's the idea, hopefully.
Leaving middle school and getting into high school now, right?
right. and then hopefully in a few years going for the PhD.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And what about the worst thing? What's something that?
Well, I mean, this is just specific for us, I guess. It's not really an industry thing because craft beer in most markets is accepted, and it's been translated as people have gotten it. Like it's obviously a huge thing in major metro areas, and even our small town is just like I said, it's still the political part of alcohol is still just a little challenging for us. So it's the hardest part for me has been making people aware that I hate the word bar. We're not a bar. We're a tap room. Sure, yeah, you could call us a bar, but we're a brewery tap room. And the public perception in our area, the craft part of it all is just sort of lost. It's just we're
but that means religious, you have room for growth.
I think so, yeah. And I think we have a lot of potential to reshape that perception with our new location, because we're also going to be a restaurant and have this big outdoor area for families.
I wonder if your town has any metrics on the economic impact that your brewery is providing, because I know for a fact that from a economic impact perspective, there's the best decision they ever made. I know that there's small towns out there begging for breweries to come because it's an economic impact to the town.
Sure.
And I know this. I know you. For example, I love Burnsville to death, but the only reason I go there is to drink at home place.
Right. Yeah. We're as a town, we could do better. I think we should play up Mount Mitchell more. But you're right. I mean, it's. I think we've done a lot of that. I think we've brought a lot of interest to the town with just our little space, which is, very, very, like I said, very small. But with that festival we put on in September, I mean, that we sold that out the last 2 years. We do a beer fest with a lot of other small breweries that's right on the town square, pretty much. We call it No Place Like Home Place. That's a friend of mine said that name, and I was like, I'm totally stealing that for our festival name. That festival, we've sold it out the last 2 years, and it's been, I mean, I've been told by the Chamber of Commerce and other local organizations that it's a sizable event for the town, and that's just one event. We're going to do tons of those events that are in
You
East
take
Space.
small businesses like that and like yours that do create that attraction that's happening in Weaverville.
Yeah, I've heard about Weaverville.
It's happening in Black Mountain.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the artist community in Weaverville has been there for 20 years, and they started off by putting together events that are now very popular and have gained a lot of attraction.
Yeah.
So, and then of course you always get that sort of political stuff in a small town. Black Mountain, they've had liquor by the license for a long time, and you wouldn't know it.
Right. There's something about the manufacturing of it in our town, because we weren't the first place to have alcohol. There's other places that have liquor by the drink too, but it's something about the manufacturing of it that's just a little edgy for some people.
Yeah.
Some of our old timers and stuff. But
there's more and more people moving in now from out of town.
There's quite a few people I know several from Asheville, Black Mountain area who have, some like Warren Wilson grads who have moved up there to start farms or work on farms, and it's a great land value. We really enjoy it, and it's just like a nice little. I always say it's like a Norman Rockwell kind of town. It has this very picturesque little town square and these old shops, these old brick buildings. And
I love it because you're from there. So you really are at home.
Yeah. Yeah.
It really is your home place.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. That was an easy name choice when it came time to come up with a name.
Yeah. I mean, it's gorgeous there. You just, and I love it. I'm going to ask you about the stereotypes of the industry real quick before we wrap up. I've talked to other brewers, and one of them mentioned to me that when they're hiring for brewing, if they see on the resume that they're a home brewer, that's almost an instant no. And the reason is, and I'm just saying this because you would think it's contrary, because a lot of home brewers have a pie in the sky. Oh, I want to brew beer. It's going to be fun. It's awesome. But there's a conflict to that stereotype of how much actual work it is in brewing.
Yeah.
And what is the I've heard before,
Do you want
you
to
guys
stop
are
being an accountant and go be a brewer?
well, there's a lot of work, and they call it glorified janitors to an extent.
Yeah.
I'll let you elaborate.
Yeah. When you're a brewer, when you're a production brewer, professional brewer, that is what it is. I mean, like the brewing part is maybe 25% of your week. You're constantly cleaning and sanitizing parts and scrubbing the floor. And yeah, I think I think hopefully that perception has changed and there's an awareness of that more so now. But when I first started, I remember there was a lot of that. I remember in some of the first jobs I had, we'd get applications with, I made this great award-winning homebrew. And I'm like, cool, dude. Like, can you scrub that tank for me? You're going to enjoy doing that, 40, weeks from now when you're still doing the exact same thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, there's that part of it, but that's where we, as an industry, weed out the people that are most passionate about where they want to go. And, I've got people now like my main brewer's he's worked a couple different jobs before he came to us, but he's worked his way to where he is. He's like our head brewer now.
He's kind of like you.
Yeah, like he started off,
stuff.
just like he bartended for a while. He just showed a lot of interest and kept coming back and just wanting to do more. And it was easy to promote people like that. But some people just will get into it and think I graduated with a degree from UC Davis. I'm instantly going to be a chemist at Sierra Nevada. Like, it's just very rare that type of situation. Depends on what, and within the brewing world, you have these departments that are totally different from one another. Like when I was at Oscar Blues, I was just sort of like a grunt making the wort on the hot side. And then you have these people in the lab doing all this scientific, like work with plating out different beer samples and all this different quality control management. And it was way more intense than anything I was doing, like cerebral. It was just more of a brain job, whereas I was just moving hoses around and pushing buttons. But I was like, oh, I'm the brewer. I'm the one making the beer, right? I should be the the brewers and especially when you get to that level are just they're sort of the low rung. They really are.
Are you the official taster?
I guess, yeah. I mean, we really just do tons of sensory. We don't really have a lab per se, so we taste the beer as it's developing on to the point of when we keg it, and we've only dumped I think we've brewed. We've brewed about 1,000 barrels since we opened, maybe a little more, and we've only dumped maybe 5 barrels. So feel pretty good about that.
Yeah. And at a certain point, your palate is better than a lab. Well, maybe not better, but just as good as a lab, especially at your level of brewing.
Yeah, and different people have different abilities with how to taste beer. Like I've got one guy on staff who he's really sensitive to a particular metallic off flavor, and he gets it in some of our beers that I only get slightly, and it usually disappears with age, but
he can pick it up.
Yeah, and there's other people that have higher sensitivities to diacetyl, which is probably the main off flavor in beer, that butterscotch flavor. I'm mostly particular. I can pick that up really quickly. Some people don't. I worked with a guy so there's this threshold of compounds, like parts per million, that most humans can pick up after a certain level, and then you have what you call your super tasters, sort of, that can pick it up at a very small amount. And this guy worked with the Highwire. He could just taste diacetyl if it was just a fraction in there. And everybody else like, what are you talking? And then we'd look at the results, and he was right.
Wow.
So, probably has insurance on his tongue.
Right.
Don't burn his tongue.
Yeah, totally.
So the beering industry as a whole, would you consider it a competitive industry?
It's almost too competitive now. I don't know when the bubble's going to pop, but it's got to at some point. The successful model now is to start something where there is nothing. I mean, or at least where there's a vacuum of sorts. We have a sister town, Spruce Pine, next to us in Burnsville, that's getting a brewery next year. And these people are coming like guns a-blazing, from what I've heard, and they're going to open up a legitimately good brewery. Sounds like that's probably going to do very well, because Spruce Pine's very hungry. Spruce Pine had a lot of businesses closed in the last few years. So it's competitive. It's very competitive if you're fighting for shelf space with packaged product, and you have like an army of sales reps trying to out jockey one another for all these different accounts. And I've been fortunate to have really good relationships that I've built throughout the years with some bar managers and restaurant owners that we've been able to get product in certain accounts where I didn't really have to send that salesperson there and really just flood them with just stuff to get, because that happens a lot. You have to really sort of
wine
kiss
and
up
dine,
to people,
or in your case, beer and dine.
Yeah. So we've been lucky. We've got some really great accounts from relationships I've built. We need to grow those, and that's the competitive part for us right now. We're sort of the monopoly on the model that we're anything remotely like what we're trying to do within a 3-county radius. And with the place we're about to open, I think we're really going to solidify our place there. It's just going to be sort of our, hopefully just sort of like our raising of the flag for that model in our area. And not to say we're competing against other restaurants and stuff at that point, but just beer wise, it's nice to be in an area where there is a need and it's totally underserved. And that's where the most successful, these places aren't getting rich, but they're building successful small businesses that are community supported and really take their communities to hopefully another level.
Well, I think
regionally.
I think you're validating what John Michael and I always say, that relationships matter. Sounds like your new role is the ambassador. for your brand and your beer, and you've got to do that work with developing those relationships, and you're doing a great job. Because you're right. If the community doesn't support you, you're toast.
Yeah. It's weird. I thought about it a lot. I don't know if I was not from there, if we would have been where we are. I think the fact that I was from there, and it's kind of like reflected in our politics there too, right? So, we just
but you knew where to tread lightly.
Yeah. We just had an election, and, it's always interesting to see who wins the elections. It's not necessarily who's the best candidate all the time. It's who's from there. Then
they're still just keeping it local.
Who knows?
Yeah. Not an outsider.
So I'm going to ask you about advice. What advice would you give someone that's wanting to enter the beer industry? And then the second part of that would be advice to someone that's wanting to start their own brewery. Sort of a two-faceted question.
Don't give away any secrets.
Sure.
Yeah, without giving away any secret.
If you're wanting to get into the industry, I don't know if a beer degree from one of these local colleges or not to poo-poo on those degrees or anything. They're valuable to some extent, but there's just a glut of people coming out of these little small programs in Western North Carolina trying to get jobs.
They think they're going to be head brewer of Sierra Nevada with a brewing degree.
Yeah, maybe so. And then I guess
I think that's true of a lot of things. You got to go do it.
You just have to. Yeah, that's also kind of speaking from a prejudiced position for myself, because when I started, it was there just wasn't that much interest in people. There wasn't that many breweries for one, and so all the people interested in beer were home brewing, and they just thought that professional brewing was the pipe dream and like something they would never even like think about doing because they didn't want to do the grunt work that they had heard about maybe. And when I was in my 20s and starting out in this, I was just so gung ho. Like I will volunteer. Like it was. If I were to do that now, it would just. I don't think breweries are. They're much more. It seems like they're much more sort of structured in how they hire people. But so maybe I don't know. I don't mean to talk. I feel like I might be talking in circles here, but that degree is not worthless. Those degrees people are getting. It's just that there's so many people getting them. And I would emphasize just doing the actual work and getting experience as much as you can over, taking 2 or 3 years to get a degree that may or may not really pay off for you as an investment.
So experience is more valuable than a degree.
Absolutely, yeah. And what was the second part? Like
somebody wants to start their own brewery.
Yeah, start with a lot of money. If I could have done it all over again, I would have tried to track down a lot more money.
But I also think that made you very highly attuned
to
what you're spending and doing.
I was also working 100-hour weeks for the first 3 or 4 weeks. So like I've a lot of friends who started breweries roughly the same time that I did, and they budgeted for like high quality people and salaries as just an expense. Just they have this like business model where they're just gonna be bleeding money for a while, but they're also going to be able to sort of sit back and start immediately managing this thing from the start with a big picture sort of outlook, as opposed to me, which started like I was delivering beer, I was making beer, I was rushing back from deliveries to open the bar, I was closing the bar. I was just like running around like crazy every week. And, God bless my wife. She did force me during that first 6 months, but it was really, really tough, and it was a lot of stress, but it did have some value in the sense that you're saying, like it did sort of make me aware of a lot of things about the business and where to really cut costs and all that. But if I were to do it over, I think the people that are able to successfully build a business model around reaching a break-even point that's reasonable while also investing in people in the beginning and hiring great managers from the beginning, that's what I would do. Your life's going to be so much better. And now I'm to the point where I do have a good team and some managers that I can just totally trust. I check in with them occasionally. I mean, that's the way it's supposed to be. And it's taken me a long time to get there, but we built that sort of slowly and organically from a very humble beginning of just this tiny little small tap room, so.
And I think you hit on that from the beginning. Obviously money, but having a good business plan in place. Yeah. Think through those cost break-even points. and you're juggling, and you were juggling that working in your business being a brewer versus working on your business being a business owner. That's just a juggle you've got to make.
Well, nobody can come and complain to you that you don't know what it's about.
Right. Yeah.
They have done every position in this.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, you really
Still
have.
sweep the
Just
floor
looking at your
sometimes.
experience, it's impeccable, and you could just really tell from each brewery you worked at, you pulled out a different skill set, and you were at those breweries at a specific time that they were doing these changes that you pulled from.
Yeah.
So that's
Sounds to me like you entered it also at the right time, because like you said, right now it's saturated. So all these people coming out with the degrees, all those beer places are going, we have enough applicants.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I mean, even
So-
Sierra Nevada and New Belgium employ maybe 50, 60 people. I mean, not counting their sales force, but like Highland and Highwire and some of these mid-tier breweries, they're just the production people. It's only like 10 or 15 people. So there's just not that many jobs.
One thing I read about that. It doesn't take a lot of people.
yeah, and everybody, it seems, wants to be in the brewing industry, or they want to have a touch on it. You know, even if in the professional world, there's people like,
Not me. I'd like a vodka tap.
Yeah, except for you. But there is, and I think there always will be the cool factor when it comes to breweries. Breweries are cool. And
We have a beer tap in our office for podcast listeners.
I know,
People
yeah.
are always
Just
very
have that
surprised about
acoustic
that.
pail. It's good. I dig it.
So where do you see the progression of the industry and where it's going to be in the next 5 or 10 years?
I think breweries like the recently opened Dissolver in Asheville are really smart to start their business from the place of providing more than just craft beer. I think you're seeing a lot of people moving. You see Catawba, Fauna some really staple local brands making boozy seltzer. That's the big thing right now.
That'd be up my alley, right?
A lot of craft beer people are, turning their noses up at that kind of thing because it seems like a nod towards like the hard, or like the Mike's Hard Lemonade, or like or Mick Ultra type of drinker, which is mostly like health conscious or calorie counters or stuff like that. I mean, craft, like big stouts and stuff, of course, they're like hundreds of calories. So people are starting to turn away from that, and the industry is starting to.
But I thought that's why they call it a beer gut.
Right. Yeah, I guess there's that's where it's going though. It's there's going to be this
More
weird
health conscious type of thing.
hodgepodge of. It's not going to be craft beer. It's going to be craft beverage. And
Yeah,
that's where that's pretty much. I mean, it's been heading that way.
Like a hybrid.
Yeah, and we have I think Dissolver locally is the first example of it just being they're just starting with cider. They're even doing wine, I think. So the idea is for craft breweries is like we've lost out on some of these people because they've just written us off as this really thick, esoteric type of beverage that doesn't necessarily appeal to everybody. And why not go ahead and make this our version of what they like, which is, maybe this just sort of spritzy, juicy water that's alcoholic.
Yeah. I think you're hitting on it to bring in the term innovation, that they're going to be innovative if in making those things like this spritzy waters. It's the same equipment that you have.
Mm-hmm.
So it's being innovative within the equipment you've got. And you can make beer, but you can also make this water. You could also do something else, and using that same product to offer other products and be innovative. So it's,
right.
I think to your point, innovation, we'll see that. I think the 5 or 10 years ago, the brewery industry was all like, oh, craft beer is cool. And then it's turning into now every hometown has a brewery.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's turning into, since that's the case, now there's going to be innovation in using that space to expand their product offering.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's always going to be trends. The hazy IPA thing's still relatively popular and kind of drives the market to a large degree for craft beer drinkers, but there's going to be something else that comes along, and it's just always going to be changing.
Yeah,
so.
I can kind of map out the years. 06, 07, it was stouts. 09 and 10, it was like West Coast IPAs with the wet hops. Yep. And then you get into the sours in 11, 12, and 13.
And now sours are kind of done. I mean,
now sours are kind of going down. And
they're much more niche. They were huge market drivers, seemed like, for a number of years.
Yeah, 12, 13, 14 sours. Yep, and now the hazy IPAs.
Hazies and pastry stouts. Yeah. And then now we're moving into like boozy seltzer water and ciders and wine.
Sounds to me like it's matching up with the generations.
I
The
think
new millennial
you're
group is
100%
coming
right.
in, and they don't want to have to choose a hard liquor or a beer.
It's
Maybe
lifestyle
they want
stuff.
a little marriage in between.
Yeah, I really think it's just a lifestyle, and it's a branding thing too, right? It's there was somebody told me that when I forget who it was, but they make a seltzer and it's in a can. It's a boozy seltzer, and they're like 90% of the people that ordered at their bar, they don't want it poured into a glass. They want to be seen holding the can.
The Truly or something like that.
Yes, yeah, something like that. So
Yeah.
it's
I had that
White
thrown at me a
Buffalo, is
couple
that
of
it?
weekends ago. No, it's the Truly.
white something.
White Buffalo.
White Zombie or something. I
Yeah,
had
White
somebody
Zombie,
throw that at me the other day. They
We're
were
gonna
like,
listen to this after we record and be like, oh, we should have known it. Oh, well.
Right.
but somebody offered me one of those. Oh, look, I have
Yeah.
these. Like,
It is
look what I've acquired.
alcoholic water.
Yeah. So home place is certainly not above doing those things. I think we're going to be just one of those players that adapt to what works for us. I mean, like I said, we started out as probably trying to be a little more weird than we became, because once we opened, we realized that people really responded to a couple of products, and it was just silly not to make those kinds of products. From a business perspective, I've always wondered why people pigeonhole themselves into what they want to make, and not, as a business person, if you want to survive or certainly succeed, you have to make what your local market is drinking, or what your target demographic is. So, Burnsville, we're still all about lagers and IPAs. I don't think the seltzer water thing's quite made its way up to where we are, but if and when it does, we'll probably give it a whirl, and we'll do it our own way. I think that's the thing is people, we're never going to be one of those breweries or craft companies that just dump a bunch of additives into a product. Or, that's the one thing I really like about how Fauna Flora is making their seltzer, boozy seltzers. They have this team of people juicing like all these fresh limes and fresh oranges. They're not just like getting a bunch of pre-packaged stuff. It's more.
They're going to do it. They're going to do it their way. Good for them.
Yep.
Well, and I think it sounds like you're trying to stay also true to your culture. And you have a bootstrap culture. You started off that way. And
Yeah.
grew your business. And you know what? I think you're going to be very conscious about what new changes that you make.
I hope so.
So, as we wrap up, why don't you tell us about your website and where they can find you?
Sure. Our website's homeplacebeer.com. It's kind of a glorified landing page right now, but we'll probably develop it a little bit over the next year. We are located right now we're right off the town square in Burnsville on South Main Street. We will be at West Main Street, 321 West Main Street, probably in January or February. We hope to be down there. We focus mostly on ales and lagers, or mostly lagers and IPAs and all variations thereof. But we do a lot of we do a lot of experimental stuff too. But we have accounts in Asheville from. I don't think it's legal. There's like weird legalities with telling where you're.
You have accounts in Asheville.
Yeah, we have accounts in Asheville.
I always look for home place,
Yeah.
and if I see a home place, I'll get that. And what is it? What's your IP? I'm blinking out on it.
Faith Healer.
Faith Healer is a fantastic. IP.
Thanks. Yeah, we try to like with Highwire, they have a circus theme, so they have like Bed of Nails Brown Ale. There was this great series of books called Foxfire that had like old Appalachian customs, and I just flipped through those for inspirations for names, and we started coming up with beer names.
Raven Gap.
Yeah, so Faith Healing was a chapter,
Nice.
and I was like, that's a great name for a beer.
Yeah, it is.
Well, I want to say thank you for joining us today. And please
Thanks for
be
having
sure. Yeah, well, you know what? Now I'm going to go have a beer.
Yeah, we need a
So-
home place.
Please be sure to review this episode, and for more information on who we are or this podcast, visit us at www.bammit.com. That's BAMM-IT.com. And join us for our next episode, where we're going to be talking to me about hiring a marketing consultant and all that is involved.
Thanks.
The hosts and the guests of this podcast make no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast should not be considered professional advice and is for entertainment purposes. It is not guaranteed that you will find this as entertaining as the hosts find themselves.